A Philadelphia judge today refused to dismiss murder charges against a fundamentalist Christian couple whose infant son died from pneumonia. When their baby got sick in April, Herbert and Catherine Scheibel didn't call a doctor or seek any kind of medical treatment. They prayed. This case would be tragic even if the facts ended there, but they don't. This is not the first time the Scheibels have been charged in the death of one of their children. They've relied on faith healing before with disastrous results. Here's Gary Tuckman.
At this North Philadelphia cemetery, most of the graves are marked, but not this spot, where two small children are buried. Two children who would be alive today, say authorities, if their parents gave them medical care. Herbert and Catherine Scheibel are charged with third-degree murder following the death of their 8-month-old son, Brandon, this spring.
Instead of caring and nurturing him, they ultimately caused his death by praying over his body instead of taking him to the doctor.
And unbelievably, this isn't the first time this has happened to the Scheibels. In 2009, their 2-year-old son, Kent, died. The parents did not seek medical care to treat him.
I tried the previous case 2.5 years ago, and the circumstances to that case to this case are eerily similar.
In the first case, the Scheibels were found guilty of involuntary manslaughter in the death of Kent. The prosecutor asked for prison time, but the judge instead opted for probation and allowed the couple to move back to their home with their 7 other children. The judge did order them to seek medical care for their children in the future. Joanne Pescatori prosecuted the case then and will prosecute this case as well. When the judge gave probation, you must have been very upset at the time.
I was upset. I was upset at that, and I was upset because I felt that they just didn't get it, and they weren't going to get it. And now here we are, standing here again 2.5 years later. Another one of their children is dead, and they still don't get it.
Which is why they've been charged with a more serious count of third-degree murder this time around for the death of their baby Brandon. So what's with these parents? Authorities point to Philadelphia's first-century gospel church, where the Scheibels belong, a church that declares its trust in God alone for physical healing. This church lists many of its core philosophies on its website. Relevant to this case is one particular belief that I will quote in part. If we are trusting in pill, prescription, or medication, Satan is able to hinder our victory from God. So why is this type of faith healing preached? We wanted to talk to the church's pastors.
Hi, my name is Gary Tuckman with CNN.
The daughter of the chief pastor said he did not want to speak with us.
How are you? Good, is the pastor home?
The wife of the assistant pastor said the same thing. Herbert Scheibel remains in jail, but Catherine Scheibel has been released to live with her parents. The remaining children are in state custody.
Ms. Scheibel, do you feel you did right by God?
No comment.
This is Herbert Scheibel's attorney.
He's sad. He's still in a grieving mode. I looked at him this morning. He seemed to have lost weight. But in terms of holding up, he's a stand-up guy.
Certainly that's a most controversial characterization. We wanted to show you pictures of Herbert and Catherine Scheibel's 2 little boys. But lawyers on both sides say they don't know of any pictures of them in life. All they have are their autopsy photos, taken shortly before they were buried in their unmarked graves.
A lot of people say you have no love for your child because you've let 2 children die without medical help.
No comments.
And Gary Tuckman joins us now live from Philadelphia. Gary, this is so upsetting. How did it play out in court today?
Well, Anderson, in Pennsylvania, you have to have evidence of malice to charge third-degree murder. So in this courthouse today, the 2 different attorneys for the husband and the wife told the judge there's no malice, there should be no third-degree murder charge. But the judge totally rejected that. He said that this isn't even a close case. He pointed out the case of their first son dying and that they basically thumbed their nose at the law. And he says those third-degree murder charges will stand, and they face the possibility, husband and wife, of 20 to 40 years in prison if found guilty of that.
And were they in court together?
They were in court together. He's in jail, like we said. She's out on bond. She was sitting in the back when he walked in. He walked in, he looked around, saw her, smiled at her. She just looked straight ahead. But it was a weird dynamic in the court. Her father was sitting next to her, and he smiled at his son-in-law. A very strange and horrible situation.
And they have other children. All the other children are what, in foster care?
7 other children are in the foster care system right now, and that reassures a lot of people that those children are no longer with those parents.
All right, Gary, appreciate the reporting. Joining me now are Art Kaplan, head of medical ethics at NYU Langone Medical Center. Also, Areva Martin, an attorney and children's advocate, keeping them honest. So, Art, I mean, it's hard not to get furious when you hear this case. People are obviously entitled to religious beliefs. If parents do not get a religious exemption that gives them the right to neglect their children, do they?
Well, the classic phrase, Anderson, is you can make a martyr of yourself. You can't make a martyr of your children for religious beliefs. So they do not get a pass. But there are a couple of exceptions. One interesting one, we do allow parents to say, I'm not going to vaccinate my child. So we have built it in. The difference here is you can't say no to therapy. If there's a proven, established therapy, insulin for diabetes, antibiotics for what this poor child had, then the state steps in and says you must treat, no exceptions.
So just some antibiotics would have saved this child's life?
Would have saved the child's life. When you get a case like this, when you're in the hospital, you want to appeal a refusal of a parent to approve care. You go to the judge. What they're going to look at is, do you have a history of proven efficacy with this treatment? Can you really say it's very, very likely to work? If you can hit that standard, and the antibiotics would have done it here, you're going to get a court order that allows you to override. And I'm sure the judge is horrified that these parents had agreed to use medicine again, didn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe, Areva, that this could have happened twice. The prosecutor in the first case, in fact, she said she knew this would happen again. Did the system fail here?
Yeah.
Absolutely, Anderson. We had
did. You know, there's two problems.
Sorry, Areva, go ahead.
I'm sorry. We had these kids placed in a home of parents who had already proven that they were not going to give their children medical care. And, you know, we have these weird exemption laws in states, particularly like Pennsylvania, that say faith healing is an exception to giving your children care, but not when there's bodily harm or not when there's a potential for death, like in this case. And I think the Child Protective Services, the court system, everyone failed these children. And it's just a shame that we now are looking at the death of a second child when the courts had an opportunity to take some proactive stance and to remove these children in the first instance and to avoid the death of this second child.
Areva, from a legal standpoint, though, I mean, if they're known as caring and loving parents without malice, won't it be hard to prove the third-degree murder charge, to prove they intentionally killed their children?
Well, Anderson, I take exception to this, you know, characterization of caring and loving parents. They went through this a first time. They were on probation for 10 years. They agreed. They stood before the court with the death of their first child and said, if any of our other children get sick, we will seek medical care. They completely ignored the orders of the court from the first case that said you cannot ignore medical treatment that your kids need. So I don't think there's going to be any issue about whether they intended to kill their child. They knew. And there's going to be testimony in this case, Anderson, from the assistant pastor where he told them to call the probation officer. And apparently the dad said, if I do, then they're going to intervene. And, you know, somehow I'm going against my faith. I'm going against God. So I don't think there's going to be any, you know, reservation in anybody's mind that these people knew what they were doing, that they were taking a calculated risk, and that this child could die from not seeking medical care.
Art, I've heard you say that you see cases like this all the time. Is that really true?
You do see them. I don't want to suggest they're common, but they do come up. Sometimes people say, I don't want to treat on religious grounds. Sometimes they want alternative medicine. Again and again, what we see is prosecutors are unwilling to be tough on the first death. And that's what leads to these problems, because Child Social Services, Anderson, in a city like Philly, they're overwhelmed. They can barely keep up with the harm that people are doing directly to kids, much less monitor a family like this. So we do see them. You've got to be tough with them, and you've got to be insistent that this is child abuse, this is child neglect. You can do what you want as an adult with your religious beliefs. You can't sacrifice your child in this way.
Art Kaplan, good to have you.
Can I just say
go ahead, Areva.
Yeah, one point, Anderson, about, you know, the First Amendment and Constitution often comes up in these arguments, and there's this, you know, tension between the parent's right to raise their child, you know, versus the state's right to take action when children are in danger. And I just want to say in these cases, what about the rights of the children? Yes, parents have their First Amendment right, but children have rights too, and they have the right to be safe and to be protected from this kind of harm.
Areva Martin, good to have you on, Art, as well. Thanks. Just